Hi, I'm Matt Shepard. Coming up on Shep Shower and Shave, are you a glass half full or a glass half empty kind of person when it comes to the lines? Or, hey, do we even have the ability to play a wait-and-see game with this team and this franchise? That's coming up next here on Shep Shower and Shave. We're brought to you by Hungry Howie's, the Michigan-based pizza company known as the original flavored crust pizza. Has the best fundraiser around. It's called Dough Raiser. Simple for your sports team, simple for your school group. You can sell Hungry Howie's pizza certificates to raise lots of money for your organization. Go to doughraiser.com. That's DOUGH Razor.com. We're also brought to you by Northwestern Tech. Call some of the big HVAC companies in the area. Ask them where you should go if you want to get into the field of HVAC. It's pretty simple. You go to one place. It's Northwestern Tech. It is the HVAC school to get trained, certified, and into the field in only 10 and a half months. You can call them today, 248-358-0006. We're also brought to you by Nate Noth Designs. You can see his work on Instagram or on Facebook. He designed the Shep Shower and Shave logo. 14 teams are pissed off today. 14 fan bases are disappointed as well. And by all is said and done, when all is said and done by the end of tonight, because there's a couple of games tonight, Minnesota and New Orleans, Adrian Peterson returns to where he starred for so many years, and the Broncos hosting the Chargers in an AFC West duel. There will be 16 teams that are disappointed, frustrated, upset. 3 key words: patience, persistence, perseverance. Now, you may not have the first because it's been since 1957, and I get it. You may not have patience because your franchise, the Detroit Lions, has won one playoff game in the Super Bowl era, and I get it. Totally understand it. I don't expect you to say this team is now something I believe in because it's 1 week. Just like had they lost to Arizona, I would not have expected you to say the 3 letters of SOL. Because if you can't tell the difference between this regime and the Martin Mayhew regime, this regime and the Matt Millen regime, this front office and the Chuck Schmidt front office, if you can't tell the difference, then I can't help you. But can you have enough patience to let a few games play out? Now, when you want to make that determining factor is up to you. I have no problem with that. You feel like I've seen enough at week 6? All right, I get it. Week 1, it makes no sense. I mean, really, the first quarter, the overreaction, and I love social media to a certain extent, but this is why it gets ridiculous. The overreaction was unbelievable. The pick 6 by Bethel, when Matt Stafford tries to get Golden Tate, he's sealed off by a linebacker. Bethel returns it. Cardinals take an early lead, and it's SOL. It's why did we pay this guy? It's he's terrible. It's Jim Caldwell didn't have his team ready. There's a few things that we'll discuss throughout this episode of Shep Shower and Shave that I think we have a tendency to overreact. And I would caution you to overreact with this team with the victory, just like I would caution you during the game while you were getting upset to overreact on a bad play or two. That team was persistent. I give them a ton of credit. First half, they were terrible. That was a bad half of football, right? Offensively. Can you find beauty in a defensive-minded game? I don't know. Now, the special teams, the mistakes, the mental mistakes more than anything, made it ugly. Defensively, they were badasses. I give them a ton of credit. That Arizona team, before you start focusing solely on Carson Palmer, that's what people are going to do today. They're the naysayers, the negative Nellies, the cynics, and this is so easy to do. I know somebody in this business who actually did it yesterday. Come on. A geriatric Carson Palmer, you only sack him once. Are you so simple-minded that you think that's the only way you disrupt a pocket? Are you so much of a simpleton that you think the only result is a sack? How about quarterback hits? That's pretty important. Quarterbacks do not like to feel pressure in their face. Detroit brought that. If you listen to my last episode of Shep, Shower, and Shave, that's what I said. I said I worried about the pressure from the edge, which is ironic because the lone sack came from the edge and Anthony Zettel. But I said, but if they can get pressure up the middle from guys like Ashawn Robinson and Haloti Ngata and Akeem Spence, then you should feel pretty good because that's where you're going to have to keep Carson Palmer. That's how you're going to have to get to him. And I talked with Lomas Brown and Rob Rubik. They co-host with me on Lions Live after every game on Fox Sports Detroit, and they said, I don't care what quarterback it is. I don't care if it's Matt Ryan, Aaron Rodgers, Drew Brees, Carson Palmer, Eli Manning, whomever. You want to get pressure in their face. And Detroit was able to do that. I thought what you should notice is Detroit was a much better tackling team yesterday than maybe what we've seen in the past. Were there some broken tackles? Absolutely. Were there some busted coverages? Yes. You're going to have that. I go into a football game, no matter who it may be, understanding that the other team is going to get a first down once in a while. The other team is probably going to score once in a while. The other team is going to stop my team once in a while. That I'm not going to watch whatever team I'm rooting for, Michigan, Michigan State, Lions, Eastern, Central, Western. They're not going to score on every single possession, man. It's just not going to happen. It's not the way football is. So that's why I say persistence, really important word, to stick with it. You can rip Jim Caldwell all you want. People have done that in the past. He's deserved it. The one thing that he does exceptionally well with this football team keeps them believing. Now, you may say that's Matt Stafford. You may say it's Glover Quinn. Okay. He's part of that. He keeps the belief alive in the room and on the field. And because he's calm, I know a lot of people look at him and say, he doesn't know what he's doing. He's lost. The game's too far ahead of him. No. He's just very poised, and he stays the same. I know you want emotion. I get it. You want Dave Wanstead on the sidelines. You want Jim Schwartz on the sidelines. You want Rex Ryan on the sidelines. A lot of times that doesn't work. Maybe it does for you. And that's your prerogative. I respect it. I don't care. I don't care how emotional a guy gets. Because as I've used this example a lot, there's a fire in the building. Who are you going to follow? The guy who's freaking out or the guy who's calm, cool, and collected? Maybe it's a bad analogy. I think it's appropriate. You may not like it, whatever the case may be. Detroit kept things under control. They did not panic. They did not freak out. They did not push the envelope when it wasn't needed. This is a team last year forced 14 turnovers. That's it. All season long, 14 turnovers. They already forced 4 in the first game. You can blame it on Carson Palmer if you want. And they could have had more, by the way. Bottom line is Detroit's going to get it. Are you going to blame Carson Palmer and take credit away from Detroit's defense? And if so, are you willing to do that the other way around? I don't think you are. So I thought Detroit was exceptionally persistent yesterday. My biggest concern going into the game against Arizona was the defense. I thought, and I know the defense is ahead of offenses early in the season. I get all that. But in watching this team, I really thought the offense would click quickly. And I thought the defense would concern me. Yeah, I mean, it was concerning to me going in. Before you try and take things away from Arizona, who went 7-8-1 last year, I would remind you of this. There's 2 teams over the last 2 seasons, just 2, over the last 2 years, in each of the last 2 years, who has had their offense and defense rank in the top 10. New England's one, Arizona's the other. It's a good football team. It really is. David Johnson, some would argue, I think he was the number 1 fantasy back selected Now, that may not mean a whole lot to people who don't play fantasy, but here's what I know. That means people expect him to get a ton of yards. And considering last year, he had 132 and a half yards per game, I can understand why people would think, A, he's going to duplicate something close to those numbers, and B, he's a valuable fantasy football guy. Detroit held him to 23 yards. Detroit held Arizona yesterday to 45 yards rushing. That's what you should be trumpeting right now. You want concerns over the offense? I think they gave you some reasons. 35-23 the final. Your defense basically gave up what? 13 points? One was a pick six early. And the field goal surrendered was because Casey Redfern panicked in the end zone, ran out instead of tried to kick it or even tap it back to get a safety. He ran out, gave Arizona prime field position, and Detroit's defense stood up to the challenge, actually, and limited them to a field goal. That's pretty damn good. So the third quarter, they gave up to 7. That's a little concerning. And then the last one is, I don't want to call it garbage, but you're not playing the same type of scheme as you are earlier in the game because you're trying to make sure they use as much clock as possible. You feel like you've nursed it away. You feel like that fourth quarter, that 20-point fourth quarter was good enough for you. So, with all due respect to your belief, I think you gave them 13. It's really 7 to me, but go ahead, 13. That's pretty damn good. Defense was really impressive. You sacked Carson Palmer only once, but you pressured him a ton. Larry Fitzgerald's one of the best in the business, right? I know you're talking about his age. Come on, look at how old he is. I don't know if you remember, he led the National Football League in receptions a year ago. And no one was targeted more than he was, and yet 13 times, and yet he only had 6 catches. I'll take it. Arizona had won the last 7 against Detroit. Last time Carson Palmer played against Detroit, he had a quarterback rating of 154.2. Sure the hell wasn't the case on Sunday. Actually had a QBR of 28 because of the 3 interceptions. All 3 by safeties, by the way. Glover Quinn, 117 straight starts, 14 picks now since 2009 as a Lion. Glover Quinn, or 2014, excuse me, not 2009. Miles Killebrew and Tavon Wilson. There will be a lot of harping on the mental mistakes. Redfern is one of them. Dwayne Washington bringing it out of the end zone. I don't know what the hell he was thinking. My guess is trying to make a spark for his team. You've got to use your head. It was ill-advised. In addition to that, he made a very bad hold on a good return earlier in the game, or during the game, I should say. Also, when you look at Jake Rudock trying to handle the snap, and I know everybody thinks that's funny and it's easy and all that stuff. It's not. It's not easy. Especially from Don Muhlbach, who brings it back there like Stafford's throwing a pass. I'm not making an excuse for him because I think he should have handled it. I thought it was a good snap. That's on him. I'm just telling you, I get it. That's the first snap you're taking. It's Casey Redfern all preseason. Every single preseason game, every single practice, Jake Rudock is not working with special teams. He's working the other team, or he's working the Lions' second unit. He ain't working with Muhlbach and Prater. So that had disaster written all over it. Those will get cleaned up. I'm confident of that. The offense, the ability or lack thereof to run the football, yes, still concerning. This team averaged 82 yards per game a year ago, 30th in the NFL. What did they do on Sunday? 82 yards. To their credit, they stuck with it. They were not going to deviate from it. Now that is a game feel for Jim Bob Cooter and Jim Caldwell. When do you say this ain't working? Let's just throw it. When do you stop saying we're going to continue to pound the rock because something's got to break. The longest run for this team was a Matt Stafford scramble when he gathered 15 yards. Amir Abdullah, who I think can be a difference maker for this team, averaged 2 yards per touch. Not good. And yet they almost doubled Arizona's rushing attack. This team, I still believe, is built through the air. Matt Stafford found, 7 different receivers. Targeted Golden Tate 12 times, found him 10 times. He only had double-digit receptions just once last year. Went over 100 yards. He did that 3 times last year. Half the catches from Kenny Golladay were scores. Theo Riddick was involved. That's great. He brings back an added dimension. This team's going to have to do a better job of running the football. Rick Wagner and TJ Lang make a lot of money. Their job is to improve the running game. Graham Glasgow, Travis Swanson, there is more expected of you when you're third-round picks. You've got to be able to run the football better. All that true, for sure. Persistence, patience, and then perseverance. The ability to persevere and win the game 35-23, knowing that you're down 10-zip after the first, that you can't play a whole lot worse than what you did in the first, and to do what you did from that point on was pretty impressive. Third, but the second and fourth. So you played, 2 good quarters of football offensively, 4 good quarters, 4 strong quarters defensively. I would much rather be talking about this type of problem, special teams, tough start to the offense, ill-advised running game for the most part, after a victory than I would be after a loss, right? How you're going to critique Matt Stafford, who knows? I suppose it all depends on whether or not you truly like him, you truly believe he's worth the money, or not. But you know as well as I do, that team does not win without number 9 yesterday. If you watched any of the other games in the NFL from Thursday night on, you tell how vital the position is, but you also understand, I hope, that guys are making mistakes, and it's bound to happen. It's not like Dak Prescott was unbelievable, okay? Because Eli Manning sure as hell wasn't. Russell Wilson struggled mightily against Green Bay, and Aaron Rodgers actually wasn't great either. You could tell Cam Newton hadn't thrown the ball in preseason. Look at how he started. Andy Dalton was god-awful, and people want him out. Jacksonville doesn't beat Houston because of Blake Bortles. They beat him because of their defense and 10 sacks. Kirk Cousins. Many of you say, I want Kirk Cousins. I think he's better. Not yesterday, he wasn't. It happens. That's the point. Anybody else under center, you're probably not winning that game. Stafford with 4 touchdowns, 29 of 41, 29th career fourth quarter comeback. And I know what you're saying. Oh, man, he had to come back in the first place. You shouldn't be trailing. It happens. There's a lot of teams that are trailing, brother. A lot of them. Atlanta was trailing Chicago. Matt Ryan stages a comeback. Feel good about that? He should feel good about it. Green Bay was trailing Seattle. He staged a comeback. Ben Roethlisberger in Pittsburgh, I think they were losing to Cleveland. They staged the comeback. What difference does it make how you get it done, as long as you get it done? Should we be grading on style points? You want your team to lead from start to finish. Try to control the emotional part of it. That goes back to patience again. Try to control that emotional part of the game. Nothing stirs up the emotion like football, I think. You're living every single down. Baseball, probably not living every pitch until the postseason, right? Basketball, you're not treasuring every single possession until the fourth quarter, right? Hockey, not every power play, you feel like you're on the edge of your seat, maybe in the playoffs. Football, it seems like every down for every week, your heart rate gains momentum and your blood pressure rises, depending on how your team was doing. Which leads us to, another thing. Detroit overall, from a standpoint of forcing turnovers, getting after the quarterback, you feel pretty good. Third downs, they were pretty damn good, man. They were 8 for 16 on third downs. Generally, you would take that. If you told me every single week you're going to be right around there, my guess is you feel pretty darn good, right? That would be my guess. Shep, I think by the end of the season, the Lions' third down conversion rate is going to be 50%. I would say, yeah, absolutely I would take that. Because I'll tell you this, you'll be in first place in the NFL. Green Bay last year, no, it was New Orleans. New Orleans was first in third down conversions at 48.5%. I don't expect that every single week. You shouldn't either. But 8 of 16, absolutely, you take. You take anything 45% or better in the NFL. And the Lions did that. Let's stress again. It was tough sledding, yes. You know why? Because Arizona's pretty good. Now, I know based on their record last year, you don't feel like that's the case. And I'm sure because of Carson Palmer and his age, you sure don't feel that will be the case either. But my guess is, and I said this last week on Shep, Shower, and Shave, my guess is Arizona is going to be one of those teams. Seattle, I think, is going to win that division. But Arizona is going to be one of those teams. Tampa is going to be one of those teams. Carolina, New Orleans, Minnesota, Philly, probably the Giants, maybe Washington. Those are the teams that you're going to be vying a playoff spot with or for, maybe even that second wild card spot. I'm not going to go so far to think, they're going to win the division based on a week. But I can tell you this. They had one of the more impressive outings in the NFL in week 1. Defense was rock solid. Special teams not. But considering they lose their punter, and Matt Prater has never punted in his professional career. He had 60 punts at Central Florida, but he had never punted in his career. You'll take it. And then the offense, even though it took some time to get going, did what it did. It's one of the more impressive wins. And considering the opponent, because Arizona's pretty good. I think most people feel like Arizona is going to contend for a playoff spot. Maybe not the division, but a playoff spot. Detroit, you could say the same thing. No question. Now, next week, they're in New York to take on the Giants. We'll podcast about that later in the week. Giants defense, very good. Look, Arizona's defense is really good, folks. So for Detroit to do what they did against that Arizona defense impressed me. I knew it might take a little bit of time. I didn't think it would take that much time. But teams only gained, 305 yards against Arizona last year. 305. That was the average against the Cardinals. That was among the best in the NFL. That's the reason they're even competitive. They've got good skill players on offense. Defensively, it's tough to move that team. It really is. So you go out and you put up 367 total yards and you put up 35 points, and I know one touchdown is for the defense. Miles Killebrew with a pick 6. You possessed the ball 33 and a half minutes against them. That's a pretty solid win. I think there's a lot of people who originally, when they're going through the wins and losses, and they got Detroit's schedule early, they thought Arizona, L. Giants, L. Atlanta, L. Most people would have thought the first win might come, and that's a huge might. Underscore it, bold it, highlight it, at Minnesota. I think there's a lot of people who felt like this team was going to start 0-3. That's why I said last week, and I'll continue to hammer this home, that the first part of this schedule, the first 7-8 weeks, is so important. I don't expect them to go 7-0. I don't expect them to go 6-2. I don't expect them to go 7-1, depending on whether you think it's the first 7 weeks or the first 8 weeks. But if you give me 5-2 in the first 7, 5-3 in the first 8, I'll be pretty happy. Doesn't mean there won't be times where I scratch my head and say, oh, they blew an opportunity there, but I'll be pretty happy because of how challenging that schedule is at the start. New York's really good defensively, man. They are. It's going to be tough to move the football against them. I don't know if Detroit's defense is better than New York's. I'm not going to base it on 1 week. I thought New York's defense was pretty good last night against Dallas. That's going to be a slug of war. It is. It's going to be a slug and tug of war in New York between those two defenses. Atlanta's offense, really good, right? Chicago surprised you a little bit with how they played Atlanta. We haven't seen Minnesota yet, but here's what we do know. Playing at Minnesota is usually really difficult. Carolina poses a huge problem because of Christian McCaffrey, which means he's lined up with a linebacker. And Detroit's linebackers didn't always get home yesterday. Of course, Arizona had quick drops. But, yeah, I mean, Christian McCaffrey and Cam Newton, obviously, that poses a serious problem. Who's going to spy Cam Newton if that's the type of defense you want to implement? Here's what we know. That team, and Newton wasn't great yesterday, that's for sure, 14-25, 171 yards. James Stewart, he was okay. He picked up 65 yards on the ground. Nothing special there. But see, Stewart and McCaffrey combined, over 100 yards. That's where you get it, right? Detroit can't get that. But you know that's an issue. You know that's a problem. You got to go in and play Drew Brees. You know that's always a challenge. Okay? They're right there. That's your first 6 games. You get a bye week to prepare for Pittsburgh. Did you see Antonio Brown yesterday? He was targeted like 10 times. He made 10 catches. Dude's unbelievable. And then you go to Green Bay. There's your first 8 games. How challenging is that, man? That's why I say 5-3, you should be happy at 5-3 before you get the back end of that schedule. It's a good start for Detroit. It wasn't the most impressive start you've ever seen. I want you to tell me this. The week 1 victor, outside maybe the Rams, who beat a terrible Indianapolis team with Scott Tolzien at quarterback, who impressed you? That's the thing that I ask people. Okay, if you're not impressed with the Lions, so be it. What impressed you about Derek Carr? He was pretty damn good, right? He wasn't great, but he's pretty damn good. I mean, everybody said, hey, Marcus Mariota, Shep. That's the guy I'd rather have. 256 yards and a 26-16 loss. And I like him, by the way. Wouldn't want him more than my guy or our guy or the Lions guy. Ours in the city of Detroit. But they lose at home to the Raiders, who are good, won 12 games last year. You can't tell yet. You can't pass judgment necessarily on the Lions just yet. But here's what you can say. Defense was better than I thought it was going to be. Offense took some time, but once they found a rhythm, I like what they did. And lastly, they beat an Arizona team that if you don't think they're in the playoff hunt, that's fine. One thing you must concede is their defense is still pretty good. Shep Shower and Shave brought to you by Northwestern Tech. To learn more about the best HVAC school you can find right there in Southfield, you can go to their website, northwesterntech.edu. We're brought to you by Nate Noth's Designs. Find his work on Instagram or on Facebook. And we're brought to you by Hungry Howie's. Folks, did you know families eat pizza at least once a week? So you want an easy fundraiser for your sports team or your school? Go to Hungry Howie's. And you can go to doughraiser.com. Dough Razor, D-O-U-G-H, razor.com. Love this time of the year where we can talk football, not just Lions. And I still think there's a lot more people who would rather have the Lions lose because you're almost miserable if you're not miserable about this football team. I think there's some people rather have them lose because they just want to be pissed off at the world. I think a lot of people would rather have them lose because they're not happy with their job and they just want to be able to vent in a different way. That's some people, not all. But another thing came up over the weekend. Michigan wasn't great, but good enough. Michigan State was better against Western than I thought they were going to be. Central was really impressive at Kansas. Shane Morris, 467 yards and 5 touchdowns. That's a nice win. I don't care how good Kansas is. You go into Lawrence, you're a MAC school, you go into a Power 12 conference on the road and you win, you deserve kudos. And then Eastern. Eastern goes into Rutgers, wins 16-13. It's the first time they've ever beaten a Big Ten team in 39 tries. And it's the first time they've ever beaten a Power 5 school for the first time in 60 tries. It was a nice win for them. Quite honestly, they dominated that game. Dominated it. Rutgers was physical against Washington. Watch the tape. Washington's defensive front, really tough, hard-nosed. Rutgers scared them. They put a little bit of fear in Washington observers. If not that Rutgers was going to beat them, that maybe they exposed something about Washington. It doesn't always have to be, in order for you to be scared as a fan, it doesn't always have to be, oh no, that team's better than us. It's, oh no, what are other teams going to do against us if this team can do that, right? And I'm sure that's what people in New Jersey are saying. It's an embarrassing loss for Rutgers, they feel, because they sense that Eastern has been a doormat of the MAC forever, which is pretty much true. It's probably embarrassing for Rutgers fans because they lost to a MAC school. That shouldn't be embarrassing. The MAC is good. We just talked about the Lions, Kenny Galladay. He's a MAC guy, Northern Illinois. Actually started his career at North Dakota. He's the only Northern Illinois receiver ever to have back-to-back 1,000 yards. They started a right guard who signed a big contract from the MAC, T.J. Lang. They drafted a tight end from the MAC in the 4th round, Michael Roberts from Toledo. I mentioned Antonio Brown. Antonio Brown, one of the best, if not the best receiver in football from the MAC, Central Michigan. By the way, he caught passes from Ben Roethlisberger from the MAC at Miami. I had brought up earlier during the podcast, Oakland, nice winner in Tennessee. Who's their best player? Khalil Mack from the MAC, University of Buffalo. And I know those are individuals, but you've got some teams that are pretty good. Western was pretty damn good last year, right? Toledo, historically, pretty damn good. I thought Western would give Michigan State more of a tussle than it did. Hats off to the Spartans, who I've also said in an earlier podcast are going to be better than people originally thought. I don't think they're better than Ohio State, Penn State, or Michigan, but I do think they're better than people will give them credit for early on. Let's see if that remains to be, if that proves out to be, or if it remains to be seen. But Eastern Michigan goes into Rutgers and wins, and the response on social media to me is A, disappointing, B, troubling, and C, it's just so cynical in our society today, whereas I don't even know why I follow it. Because instead of giving a team credit like Eastern deserved, their Brogan Roback, their quarterback, very good, really windy day, threw a beautiful touchdown pass to Antoine Porter in the corner. Instead of recognizing good for you, it was one big bash on Rutgers. They're not a Big Ten team. They're not any good. They don't belong in the conference, so on and so forth. Now, I thought it was an odd fit for the Big Ten in the first place. I really did. But overall, last time I checked, they are a Big Ten team. Last time I checked, they brought a guy, Chris Ash. It was enough of a position to be appealing for a guy from Ohio State. Last time I checked, Jerry Kill, who brought Minnesota back on the map, had great success at Northern Illinois, had outstanding success at Southern Illinois and Saginaw Valley. Very good offensive coordinator. He's the offensive coordinator for Rutgers. They have one of the best return men in the history of the NCAA. Janarian Grant has 8 kickoff returns for touchdowns in his career. That is tied for most in NCAA history. I'm not saying they're great. I'm not saying they're going to pull an upset of somebody in the Big Ten, per se. I'm telling you to say, well, they're not a Big Ten team. Yeah, they are a Big Ten team. At what point are we going to say, you know what, BC's not very good. They really aren't a team that deserves to be in the ACC. Sorry, Kansas isn't any good. They're not. If you really want to call them a Big 12 team, come on, give me a break. Rutgers, and I don't know what's going to happen. You know, I mean, they'll beat Morgan State next weekend. Then they got to go to Nebraska and Ohio State, and they're going to get run there. They're going to beat somebody on their Big Ten schedule. They will. They'll beat somebody. They've got to make some changes for sure, but they'll beat somebody. Washington forced them into 5 punts. That's it. Washington. Eastern's defense, in the meantime, you know what they did? And Eastern kind of hurt themselves a number of times because they had 9 penalties, for crying out loud. But Eastern's defense limited Rutgers 4 of 16 on third downs. But as I said, Washington forced Rutgers to punt only 5 times in the game. Eastern forced them into punting 8 times. That's how good Eastern's defense was, if you want to measure it against Washington. But people, instead of, and Eastern scored in every single quarter against them, instead of crediting the Eagles for a nice win, it's not going to be their greatest win. Chris Creighton, their head coach, actually said after the game, this cannot define us. This cannot be our biggest moment. We must have a bigger moment than this. And there are games in which it could be. They didn't look at it that way either. They didn't look at it and say, I'll tell you what, we beat Rutgers, that makes our season. No, it doesn't. You know what makes their season? More than that? Or winning at Kentucky? Winning at Toledo. Winning at Northern Illinois. Winning at Central. Or beating Western at home. All of them, are much bigger games than the game against Rutgers. And that's not a knock on Rutgers or the Big Ten. It's just a fact. Eastern Michigan's not going to win a national championship, so winning the division, winning the MAC is more important to them than beating Rutgers, for crying out loud. It's a nice feather in the cap. It's a nice check off their box. It's nice to finally do something that they had never done before. And they did it. Now, the quest is, don't be satisfied. And I don't think they will be, because they've done certain things under the Chris Creighton era that many people never thought or have done before. They beat a big team on the road outside the Mid-American Conference. First time ever when Eastern did that a couple of years ago. They get back to a bowl game. First time since 1987. They did that last year. Now they check this one off. We've beaten a Power 5 school. We've beaten a Big Ten team. Now let's go get and win the division. The latter part of that statement was a hell of a lot more important, stressed in the offseason than it was beating Rutgers. And yet we have people on social media constantly saying, well, Rutgers really isn't a Big Ten team. Ha, 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 ha. I bet you didn't think that last week when they scared the crap out of Washington, did you? Or maybe you just looked at it and said, you know what? Maybe Washington's not as good. Maybe Washington's a fraud. Jake Browning, a candidate for the Heisman a year ago. Kyle Bolden threw 2 touchdown passes against that Washington defense. Rutgers rushed for 131 yards against that Washington defense. They limited the Huskies to 84 yards rushing last week or 2 weeks ago to the 8th-ranked team in the country. And then what? And then they take on Eastern. And what does Eastern do? Eastern rushes for 114 yards. They got a quarterback who throws for more, a rushing game that had more, and a defense that forced 3 turns, 2 picks, and a fumble recovery. Pretty impressive. But all people are going to do is focus on how bad Rutgers was rather than how good Eastern was. Maybe that's our society. Maybe that's just the way sports is these days. It is more about, you know what? Hey, I want to be the negative person. I want to be the guy who rips everybody more so than anything else. And yet I bet you most of those people have no idea that Rutgers has 16 transfers. That their starting running back, was a transfer from Miami, Florida. That running back gained just 56 yards. They got a tight end who's a transfer from Miami, Florida. Had 3 catches. That's it. That the quarterback, Kyle Bolin, is a transfer from Louisville. Actually threw for over 2,000 yards with Louisville, but Lamar Jackson's better. He took his spot. Bolin transfers to Rutgers. Eastern picks him off twice. Limits him 17 of 37. Did you know that? Of course not. Because once they hit Rutgers, they immediately lose credibility. Sort of like the Lions. Somebody tweeted yesterday, TJ Lang has been lionized already. In the first quarter, of course. The knee-jerk reaction. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to watch the game on Twitter, and I'm just going to rip constantly. See, I like to follow how that goes, how many people are actually who are ripping on a team early on, SOL, lionized, terrible coach, needs to be fired, should have never signed the guy. How many of those people in the fourth quarter are saying, not the same old Lions, changing the culture, nice decision, guy's worth the money? Nobody. And you know why? Because that would be an overreaction in the fourth quarter. And it would be. I wouldn't condone it. I wouldn't say, bully for you, retweet it or like it. But what you were saying in the first quarter was an overreaction as well. The people were tweeting that Rutgers in the Big Ten, blah, blah. They didn't see anything. They didn't see a part of that game. They saw a final score. They used an assumption from how Eastern used to be and how Rutgers has been the last few years. It's interesting. When Greg Schiano was there and made him exceptionally competitive, and Schiano's now at Ohio State, when he was there and one of the better coaches, everybody thought Schiano would be a really good fit for ... Michigan, for example. And then what happens? Exactly. It's interesting how our perception or our belief is tough to shake on what teams have done in the past. Eastern, never traditionally strong. Chris Creighton gets there, changes the culture, brings in better players, brings in bigger and better bodies. I mean, the Rutgers people are like, I can't believe how big that offensive line is. Eastern's offensive line that averages about 6'5", 307, I believe. Big boys up front. It's changed a little bit. There is a chance for people to change, for programs to change, thus changing your mind, is it not? How long it takes you to be convinced is up to the individual. But before you start jumping on one team and how bad they are, maybe it would be a good idea to actually either watch it, read up on it, talk to somebody associated with it, and get an idea of what that game was like or what the team that surprised you most was all about. The easy thing to do is sit back and I'm going to watch another game on TV. I'm watching Penn State and Pittsburgh. Oh, I see that Eastern upset Rutgers. I think I'll tweet about Rutgers sucking again and not giving any credit to Eastern Michigan. How about taking a look at what they were able to do and give them some credit because of their accomplishment? Same thing with the Lions. You're watching them, but are you truly watching? Can you tell that they're different? I wonder, when people watch that team, can they truly tell whether or not the Lions are a different team than what you've used to been watching? You used to be watching a team that just killed itself on a regular basis. And I'm not going to use injuries as an excuse last year, but they went into New York and they didn't play that well because they had a chance to really solidify the division, I believe, and win the division. Couldn't get it done. We all know the story. But we also need to know that there are certain circumstances. I'm not saying it's an excuse, but sometimes there are explanations. There's a difference between an explanation and an excuse. Certain explanations, losing a guy like Travis Swanson, losing a guy like Theo Riddick, losing Amir Abdullah, losing Eric Ebron, having Matt Stafford injure his finger. That would affect most teams. It really would. I want you to think about this for a moment. Let's take Dallas. And Dallas is really good, aren't they? I think so. Love their offensive line. But at times, we're manhandled a little bit last night, which causes some concern for me going to New York. But let's say Dallas lost Travis Fredericks, their center. Many believe is the best center in football. Dak Prescott, their quarterback. Actually, they did lose Tony Romo, so Prescott came in and did a hell of a job. Ezekiel Elliott and Jason Witten. Let's say they lost those guys and weren't playing with Sean Lee, which is something that Detroit had to experience last year as well. How good do you think they'd be? Do you think they'd be as good as they were at the end of last season? My guess is no. Yours would be too. I mean, if you're a smart football person, you would say they would not be as effective. Now, there might be a guy who steps forward and surprises you a little bit, but that would affect any team when you lose that much. Why can't it be different? And I mean that. Well, at what point can we, I'm not saying it should be right now, I'm just asking you, at what point can we say, you know what? The Justin Bethel 82-yard interception return for a touchdown was a tough moment to swallow, but I'm gonna sit back and I'm gonna see how they respond. When you watch certain teams, I don't care what sport, I don't care what level, when you watch certain teams, do you not feel better when a team can take a punch, still stand, and deliver a blow right back? I do. I think that's really important. I don't want to see whatever team it is, I don't care if it's the Wings, Pistons, Lions, Tigers, whatever, lead from start to finish. At some point, you would like to see them, how they're going to handle, lack of a better phrase, some adversity. And everybody is going to have to deal with it. Every player is going to have to handle adversity. You handle it every day in your life. Your kids do the same thing, handling the adversity. You want to teach your kids a lesson. I want you to work through this problem with your friend, with your coach, with your teacher, with your advisor, with your counselor, with me. I want you to work through it. That's how you grow. You probably give that lesson to your kids on a regular basis, or if you're not a parent, you've probably heard that from somebody at one point. And it's made you a better professional, a better person, a better friend, a better husband, a better father, whatever. Why is that any different in football? Why is it any different in sports? Handle the adversity. They faced adversity early on, the Lions did, and they handled it. That, to me, showed something. Something that we haven't seen in the past. Early on, they're getting the shit kicked out of them. What do you think? Oh, you know what? Same old Lions. No, the same old Lions roll over. Been there, done that with them a long time ago. They rolled over. This one is over. That's not this team. Doesn't mean they're going to win 16 games. I'm just telling you. This team showed you something. It showed that persistence. It showed that perseverance. Were we able to stay patient with it? For most of us, the answer to that is no. See, San Francisco rolled over. They were getting the crap kicked out of them, and they rolled over. Indianapolis was getting the crap kicked out of them, and they rolled over. That's not the measuring stick. I'm not suggesting it is. The Texans, to a certain extent, all kinds of problems. Bengals, all kinds of problems. Hey, man, like I said at the beginning of this podcast, there's 14 teams. There's going to be 16 at the end where people are just shaking their head going, man, what are we going to do now? We got to fix this. There's a lot to work on. There's still a lot to work on with the Lions. But I'd rather work on it being 1-0 than 0-1. Shep, Shower, and Shave brought to you by Hungry Howie's. The Michigan-based pizza company, known as the original flavor of custom pizza, has the best fundraiser around. All you got to do is go to doughrazor.com, doughrazor.com to find out more. We're brought to you by Northwestern Tech. HVAC is all they teach. They've perfected their hands-on program over the last 38 years. They've got flexible scheduling that allows you to keep working your job while training for your actual career, and you can do it in 10.5 months. Go to northwesterntech.edu, and we're brought to you by Nate Noth Designs. Find his work on Instagram or on Facebook. Support the sponsors. We need it to keep the podcast alive. If you know anyone who might want to sponsor Shep, Shower, and Shave as a podcast, you can let us know via Twitter, direct message at ShepMatt. We'll be back later the week to talk more on the various things that we think interest you most in the world of sports. Shep, Shower, and Shave. Thanks for listening.